Did you know that you can actually harness the power of negative reviews to write a fantasy romance novel that actually sells? Hello, I'm Jane Castell and I write historical romance set in medieval and Dark Ages Scotland, and I also write romantasy set in Celtic-inspired fantasy worlds. I've been a full-time author since 2019 and I make most of my living writing historical romance. But I recently, in the last year, have also been dipping my toes into fantasy romance. And last year I wrote my first duology. It's this one. It's the Enforcer's Bride duology, and there are of course two books. There is Bound by Deception and Ashes of Betrayal. So these two, as you can probably see from the cover, have a real Scottish vibe, an Outlander vibe to them. And like I said, I published them in September and December last year. So if I'm honest, I wasn't sure how the fantasy was going to do because I have made my name, as I said before, writing historical romance, and my readers are there for that. But I have always been a huge fantasy romance fan, even before it became a thing. Now it's really trendy and popular, and there's been a profusion of books in the genre. But back in the day, there were just a few authors, and they were really just writing epic fantasy with a romance subplot, and I loved those books. So I wrote my duology and I crossed my fingers and I let people know on TikTok, and it took off. And I am pleased to announce that this little duology is doing really well. Now, not everything I write does well, and not every new thing that I try is a success, but I have been in self-publishing since 2012, and I had my first breakout book in 2019, and I've been full-time since then. So along the way, I have learned a lot. And before I even embarked on the writing of book one of my duology, Bound by Deception, which was the first book, I did a lot of research. And the biggest amount of research that I did was I actually went onto Amazon and Goodreads and I looked at the most popular books in the genre and what readers were liking and disliking about them. So I picked about half a dozen best-selling books in the romantasy genre. A lot of these were books that I have read already and really loved. And they're books also that perhaps I read and didn't like so much, but I wanted to know what other people thought, because me being an author, I'm always going to be too close to it to see. And also my tastes are going to be also through the lens of an author. So it's really good to be able to see it from a reader's point of view. So if readers were saying things like, the world building wasn't detailed enough, then a light bulb goes off in my head and I write down, make sure you have rich and detailed world building. And then another comment might say, the characters weren't developed enough. I felt that they weren't multidimensional. Then I write that down. Make your characters nuanced and multidimensional. Then another one was that they weren't so much into this kind of cliched, stabby heroine who's just really tough but doesn't seem to have any softness or nuance to her character. So I would stop there and I would write a line that said, make your heroine strong but relatable. Do you see where I'm going with this? I ended up with a quite detailed list of things that people really didn't like from these books, and I turned them on the head and made them positive, and then made a master list that I would then take into account when I was planning my duology. So before I even started writing it, I had in my mind the things that readers are looking for in the genre. Now you might think this might stifle your creativity, but I find that it's the opposite, because I write primarily to make my readers happy as well as making myself happy. So it's really important that I have in my mind the reader and the sort of thing that he or she is going to enjoy. I want to put in juicy scenes that I know they're going to rub their hands together and go, yes, yes, I love these scenes in romantic novels. And I'm so glad that this author has actually understood what I want. So I took all those scenes and all those sentences that I mined from negative reviews, and I used them in the planning of Bound by Deception. So Bound by Deception is about a fae assassin called Bree, who is sent through the Standing Stones into the mortal realm, and she has to take mortal form, which is very difficult for her actually. She doesn't enjoy that one bit, and she has to act as a spy in the High King's court and marry his chief enforcer in order to gain the enemy secrets. This has a juicy, slow burn, enemies to lovers romance, which is something that I know lovers of this genre really enjoy. For the world building, I did a really deep dive into Scottish folklore and mythology, and I based the world of Albia on Pictish Scotland. And there was a real reason for this. One reason was that I have actually written a number of historical romances set in ancient Scotland in the 2nd and the 4th century. So I know that time period really well, and I know a little bit about the druidic practices and things like that. And I thought, what if I could bring that to life in a fantasy world, and I could bring all these mythological creatures to life, and I could make druidic magic real, like really real, like earth magic in my story. So this little duology is doing very well for me. It is selling consistently, and I'm just delighted that I'm able in a crowded market to actually make a little bit of a splash. So I decided to write another duology, and it's this one here. It is Unforgiven is the duology name, and book 1 is called The Queen and the Half-Blood, and so it follows a character that you meet in the first duology. It's her story, and obviously it's over 2 books, and you don't have to have read the first duology in order to enjoy this one. So the world building and everything has to be just as strong in this first book than it does in the previous 2. But just to make sure that I am hitting all the right notes, I'm going to do the same thing again with this book. So I've actually started writing The Queen and the Half-Blood. I'm about 25,000 words in. It's going to be a bit bigger than the last duology. The book's going to be a bit chunkier. Not that the other ones were small, but these need to be a little bit bigger. And what I've done this time is, rather than go into other fantasy romance novels and look at the 3-star reviews, I've actually been brave and gone into my 3-star reviews for this book and this book, and I have mined what people didn't like about this duology and twisted it so that I don't feel bad about it, but also I can then, it's positive, and I can make sure that I either avoid certain things or make sure I double down on certain things in the new duology. So what was some of the feedback I got? So one of the things people said was they would have liked the stories to have been more complex, deeper, and the book to have been a bit chunkier. Hence why the new duology, each book is going to be about 100,000 words, whereas the previous ones, they were about 80,000 words, which I felt wasn't quite long enough. So I'm adding an extra 20,000 words onto each book. So that was the first thing, make them chunkier. The second thing is go even deeper with my world building. Now, world building has always been something that I have really enjoyed, and I'm always a little bit afraid to give like an info dump and really kind of drag the readers under. So there's always a fine line, like a balance that you have to make between developing the world fully and boring the reader, and I don't want to bore the reader. But perhaps 1 or 2 of the people who read the previous duology felt that there wasn't enough detail. Not everybody thought that, but 1 or 2 people did, and I was like, you know what? I can go on and make sure that it's really richly detailed and nuanced, and that you're really immersed in this really Celtic vibe where fairy creatures, roam in the forests, and it's misty and dark and cold and grey, but like Scotland really, where I live. That was the second thing that I'm really doubling down on. Another thing that I'm really doubling down on is I want to make sure that the fantasy plot is really, really strong. So fantasy romance, by its very name, means that the romance is supposed to have as much weight as the fantasy plot. But I feel that I love romance. Romance is what makes a story shine, in my opinion, but also we come to fantasy for a really exciting plot, for adventure, even a little bit of a quest element. So although I probably wouldn't do a classic epic fantasy quest in this type of book, I feel that journeys and discovery and exciting battles and adventure are all really an important part of it. So I'll be definitely doubling down on that as well. I will also be taking special care to make sure that the romance is as complex and nuanced and developed as it possibly can. Now, this is also a word count issue that perhaps I had in the first duology, in that each book was about 80,000 words, and these books are going to be bigger. So I'm really going to take my time in developing the relationship as much as I possibly can, so that you get as many getting to know you scenes as possible, so that it's not just lust and attraction. You don't just have some spicy scenes, which we all enjoy, or most of us enjoy, I do, in my romance, but you get the build up to it, the longing, all of that needs to be really kind of accentuated and really kind of focused on. So I'm going to be doing that as well for my new duology. So there you have it. There are a few nuggets I've given you there of things that are particularly personal to me and my writing, but there are also things that I know through looking at reviews, because reviews are a goldmine. You can discover so much about your ideal reader, and sometimes it's not nice to look at reviews. I don't actually in general make a habit of like trawling through my reviews and looking at my 1 or 2 star reviews, because quite frankly some of them are pretty nasty, and it's hard enough to get through the writing of a manuscript of a big book, and you love the story and you believe in it and you spend so much time editing it. It can be quite heartbreaking when somebody just reads it and hates it and feels compelled to write about it. So I wouldn't say that I make a habit of going in and looking at all my negative reviews, but if you do it in a strategic manner, you get a pen and paper and you go through and you find the 3-star reviews and you start making some notes, and then you take the negatives and you turn them into positives, and then you make a list that you keep near your computer or on your computer or somewhere where you can actually see it. And then when you're actually planning the story, and then when you start writing the story, it's always there in the forefront of your mind, because you're there thinking about what the reader would like and trying to deliver on that. And I've done that to some degree with all my books, including my historical romances, which do very, very well as well. And I've always been very reader focused, and I think that's one reason why I have a career in being a indie author, which is not an easy thing to have achieved, and I am so grateful for all the readers who follow me and read my books. But I also think I play a part in that as well, because as you can see by watching this video, that I'm quite strategic about how I approach my writing. Yes, it's a creative endeavor, but before I sit down to write, I really think about what I'm trying to achieve and what I want my readers to feel, and also what I know that they might be looking for as well. So I hope you found this video useful. Please comment below if you've got any other tips regarding this. I'd love to hear, and hopefully I shall be back again soon with another video along the same lines. Bye everyone.